Hey folks, Dust here, and I thought since I had a little bit of time to put out a piece of content, I would, as I am, of course, in Bucharest, Romania, doing the analyst desk for the Perfect World Shanghai Major. Also did all the RMRs and all that jazz. So if you don't know who I am, if you've been watching the major RMRs, you've seen me on the desk at some point, probably. I also did a video earlier talking about me getting hired for the major and where I came from and things of that nature. If you're, a little bit newer to CS and have no idea where I came from and all that jazz, it's all there. But again, we had this 3-day break before the playoffs start, and so I thought I would do a piece of content here and actually just go through my PickEms for the playoffs for the Shanghai Major we got coming up. And first, we'll take a look at some of what I've already done this stage. So I'm still in the Diamond Dream column, I guess you could say. The first stage, I was able to pick 7 correctly. I got both 3-0s. I got one of the 0-3s, and then I was able to get a good majority of the teams that would advance outside of that. So did really well in that stage. And of course, the elimination stage, I got the 3-0 on Vitality. I missed MongolZ because I actually had them in my... Here, that can actually just show you. I had MongolZ going through, but not 3-0. I missed out on Navi, as I'm sure many people did, whether they picked him 3-0 or picked him in here somewhere. But then wound up getting Vitality, Scott Big, and then pretty much ran the table. I mean, again, other than getting MongolZ wrong, I pretty much ran the table as far as teams that would advance. So back-to-back 7 out of 10s, I guess you could say, as I guess the math on that. So pretty well done. So I'm actually going to start with the bottom side of the bracket, and I'm going to talk about the quarterfinals matches in pretty decent detail, but then after that, I'm going to be a little bit more, I guess, flexible with things, just because, I don't want to start talking about matches that actually don't wind up materializing. If I do get a prediction wrong, it would kind of just make no point. But we do have these 4 guaranteed matchups, so I'll definitely do those in a little bit more detail, and then I'll be a little bit more abstract about my picks for the winners of the semifinals and, the winner of the tournament itself. So we're actually going to start things here at the bottom of the bracket with Vitality versus FaZe. And in this situation, I do think Vitality is the very clear favorite. Yes, they only have one title this year, which was a win at IM Cologne. So the biggest tournament that you can win outside of a major for the most part, where they ran through Mouse Sports, they ran through Navi, they beat FaZe, and they really got the job done. In fact, if you want to talk about head-to-head really quick, because we're going to do that for this matchup, they have played each other already in the EU RMR, which is a 2-0 victory for Vitality. Then they played each other at IM Cologne in one of the earlier matches. They beat them there 2-1. Then they also played each other at the Blast Spring Finals, where they also beat them there 2-1. Then they 2-0'd them at the Season 19 EPL event. And their only loss to them this year was, in fact, in the semifinals of the Copenhagen Major. So big head-to-head advantage here for Vitality if you want to go that route. Also, just in general, Vitality has been a consistent top 4 placing team throughout the course of the year. You look at them, they had a easy run at the RMR, beating Gamer Legion, Bet Boom, and FaZe. Then the Shanghai Major. So far, they beat Gamer Legion, Furia in main Brazil, so didn't really get tested too much, but ultimately did what they needed to do and have had time to relax and kind of focus up for the playoffs. Looking at things, they obviously have a really nice lineup of players. I mean, Ziwu is one of the top 3 players in the world. Obviously a fantastic opper, but also just a great hybrid. Particularly his ability to entry frag on the T side with an AK-47 makes Ziwu just so much more valuable than many other oppers, alongside just his consistent performance as a superstar level player. He takes a huge load of their opening duels and has a crazy high success rate, higher than almost any other player. I think the only people that are really comparable is like Nico Malbs and Donk and maybe Xantaris, like a couple other people you could put into that category of success in opening duels. But yeah, Ziwu is just obviously insane. Flames, fantastic entry fragger in his own right, and is playing pretty well. Spinks, great mid to late round specialist. And then Mezzi's been popping off at this event. I mean, I don't know if y'all been paying attention, but he's been playing really damn well. And then Apex, at this point, super tenured IGL, can also do some entry work in his own right, can have pop-off moments every now and then, has a decent success rate in opening duels compared to other IGLs, but you certainly wouldn't put him in the fragging IGL category like a Blitz or a Big Uzera or a Twist or something along those lines, but still certainly does a great job. Then this team also just has a super sick map pool. They are fantastic on Dust 2, 9-2 in their last 11 games. They are fantastic on Mirage. They're 15-2 in their last 17 games. They're Nuke. They're 10-1 in their last 11. And then they're Vertigo. They're 7-1 in their last 8. So they have 4 maps where they're in contention for best team in the world. Then outside of that, their Anubis has been a little shaky recently, but they have had a history of playing it well in the past. So it is certainly something that is viable to them. They obviously don't play Ancient, which is a little tough because a lot of teams do play Ancient really well, but they can just kind of take that weapon away. And that does open them up to maybe a vulnerability on Anubis, but I still think that it's decent enough. And then again, they're just so elite on Dust 2, Mirage, and Nuke, and Vertigo. And I know a lot of teams are probably going to ban Vertigo anyway, so they won't get an opportunity to play it. For example, FaZe hasn't played Vertigo, so they're not going to get that opportunity. But then they just ban FaZe's Ancient, which is one of their best maps. And then, FaZe's Anubis hasn't even been that great either, honestly, lately. It's also been kind of dodgy. In fact, all their maps have been kind of dodgy. So, yeah, I just think between Vitality's map pool, overall talent, roles, how good they are tactically, very capable of playing, default CS, doing the tempo changes, running the faster strats, letting, Ziwu and Flames just go off and create those openers, having Spinks and Mezzy there for a support system as well as like just mid to late round specialists. I think that they just shape up super nice and are really, for me, the most complete team. The only thing that you can really, I guess, critique them for is that they haven't won more, right? Only winning Cologne, you would have thought they would have gotten a couple of more trophies here and there. But again, consistent top 4 finisher. Yes, they lost to G2 at the Blast Fall final. Yes, they struggled at Rio, getting knocked out by Mouz. Yes, in the World final, they also got knocked out by G2 there. Eternal Fire, that was a big upset loss at EPL this most recent season. So there are a couple of stains, I guess you could say, on the resume of Vitality, but overall, I definitely am going to be pretty high on them. And they're going up against FaZe, who, for my money, has just been shaky for a very long time now. I mean, obviously, at the beginning of the year, second at Katowice, second at the Copenhagen Major, winning Chengdu, they looked like a team that was going to be really in the mix. And while they've consistently been a gatekeeper of the top 5, they've never really been a part of it themselves. I mean, when you just kind of look at a lot of these tournaments, they're finishing, kind of in that 5th to 6th range. But they had EPL Season 20 where they finished 13th to 16th. They also were only able to get to the top 8 at Rio. And just in general, don't seem to have the same consistency as some of the other, teams you would consider top 5. Now, granted, it's not like they're losing the scrubs. Like when they got knocked out the Blast World final, it was to Spirit. Rio, it was Mouse. Blast Fall final, it was Navi. But EPL, it was Cole. So that one hurts a little bit. And they also lost to Sangal in that tournament. So that was kind of a big one. They got knocked out of Cologne by Saw as well. So that was definitely a little bit of a dark mark on them. But yeah, I would say generally speaking, the only real losses they're taking are to top 5 teams in a row. And they're usually getting maps and making close series and all that jazz. But with that said, they haven't been able to beat one of the top teams so far in Shanghai. So at the RMR, they beat Cloud9 and Falcons, but then lost to Vitality and ultimately beat Fnatic to get through. Also, let's just memory hold that whole Cloud9 match they played afterwards in a best of 3 for a spot that didn't wind up mattering. We'll forget about that. But at the major itself, they did get a best of 1 victory over Mouse. So tip your hat to that, but then ultimately lost the best of 3 to G2 and had to play Furia the final day to advance after a loss to Heroic and a loss to G2 earlier on in the major. So with that said, outside of that, yes, I know Frozen's a consistent performer. Rops at times can still be huge. Definitely has his pop-off moments. Rain has had a fantastic trip to Shanghai, in my opinion. He has been just absurd with his ability to create openings and just frag out. So he's actually had a huge uptick in form at just the right time to really help Rops and Frozen kind of bring this team forward. But I do think Brokey might be the worst opera in the playoffs. I hate to say it, but, him and Ultimate are probably the 2 weakest ops going into this. And so that is going to be something that's going to hold them back, especially when you're going to have to go up against Ziwu in this matchup. And then if you do make it past, you're likely going to have to go up against Muncie in the semifinals. So that is something that hurts them. Also, just don't really know where they're going to go with their map pool. Their Ancient's really good, but against Vitality, they're not going to get to play it. And then their Anubis has been pretty shaky. They have a negative record on it, and they're 5-5 in their last 10 games. So kind of all over the place. Same for their Dust 2. They're 5-5 in their last 10 games and overall have a negative record for the year. Then Inferno has been a good map for them for the majority of the year, but they're only 6-4 in their last 10 games. We did see them beat Mouse Sports, obviously, this major, but we also saw them lose to Furia and lose to G2. And really, to their credit, it's just a lot of their losses are super close, 11-13 or overtime type losses. So I would say their Inferno checks. That'd be one map I might give to them. And then obviously if they do get to play Ancient later on, if they get past Vitality, that's another map they can count on. But their Mirage is also super shaky. They don't play Vertigo. And so really it feels to me like the only maps that I can really count on them on are Ancient, Inferno, and I think they still have a pretty good grip on Nuke. But even then, their recent games have not been that great. They've had a few blowout losses, and in their last 20 matches played, they have a negative record. So, yeah, I just think there's too many red flags for FaZe. Like, it's great that they made it to the playoffs, getting the win over Furia, getting to see them, even after some struggles this year, make the playoffs of this major. But I don't rank them very highly. And so, with that said, I am going to go ahead and pick Vitality to move through. So when it comes to G2 versus Heroic, we'll start with G2. Obviously, this is a team that can simultaneously beat everyone, but then also disappoint. So they are just a very hard team to really put your thumb on. Obviously, they have a couple of recent titles at the Blast World Finals and the Blast Fall Finals, but then they also went out dead last at IEM Rio. So you get what I mean. Like, there's just like these weird blips that happen to them despite the fact that they're so incredibly talented. And the same thing kind of happened in Shanghai, where at the RMR, they did what they needed to do the first best of ones, but even the 9-Pana's best of one went to an overtime, and then they lost to 3D Max, but then they beat Spirit. So again, it's like these weird blips happen despite how talented they are. And then at the major itself, they lost to MongolZ in the opening best of one. Fair enough. MongolZ have been red hot. Beat Big, beat 3D Max, and they ultimately beat FaZe to move on. So pretty good finish to get their revenge on 3D Max, so to speak, after losing them at the RMR. And then, of course, they beat FaZe. Obviously, we know how incredibly talented this team is. Nico, one of the best riflers in the world, also one of the most versatile riflers in the world. He can entry frag, he can aggro lurk, he can make big plays, he can anchor. He is the most versatile rifle we've probably ever seen in Counter-Strike. The only other players that compare to me is maybe someone like Bit, who can also entry but lurk and play anchor positions, but still be a big playmaker when he's in form. Obviously, like Prime Shocks is someone who is kind of a Swiss Army knife of Counter-Strike, but Nico is just a special class of player who can basically do anything in the game. Then you have MongolZ, pound for pound best operator in the world, also has incredible rifles, also a great mid to late round specialist, but can also create openings when need be with an AK or with an op. So super strong there. MongolZ obviously has been a revelation this year. Incredible entry fragger, has maintained a high level of play despite not being the quote-unquote focus on this team compared to when he was the star of M80 and he got all his roles. He's been able to adjust to new roles and still play at a very high level. And then you have Hunter, who at times can pop off, but still certainly a serviceable support player even when not. Snacks, oh my goodness. Okay IGL, but not great. I do think sometimes they pigeonhole themselves and get stubborn and don't play as diverse as they could. I mean, I've seen enough film on this team to know that they're capable of doing a lot of different openers and a lot of different mid-round and late-round plays, but some maps I watch in isolation, they can just kind of get bogged down. And sometimes it's fine because it works, right? Like when they ran 5 successful A executes against 3D Max on Ancient in a row and won all those rounds. Like, yeah, it can work just because you have so much talent. I mean, I do think MongolZ, Nico, and MongolZ is the strongest trio in Counter-Strike right now as far as being able to go into a site and know that they're going to trade out efficiently. Even if MongolZ goes in first and dies, you got Nico and MongolZ to follow him up. But MongolZ can also just get the clean entry and then things spiral. And then Snacks is like a weird X factor. Well, sometimes he'll get like these crazy lurk timings and clutches. Then sometimes he'll go in first and create space for his team as an entry. So kind of a seesaw for me when it comes to Snacks. Obviously, this team in their own right has a pretty decent map pool. Like, they can play Anubis, so they haven't played it a lot. I do think their Dust 2 is very good. I think their Mirage is very good. They've also been exceptional on Nuke. They've won 7 in a row there. So they have a pretty solid map pool. Their only real vulnerabilities is obviously they banned Vertigo, which isn't that big of a deal. It's a pretty popular ban. And then their Inferno hasn't been as great as you'd like it to be. It's not bad, but it's just not elite. And then Ancient, they've had some stumbling blocks on that too, but they have had some recent wins over Spirit and Navi, like Spirit at the RMR, for example. So it's okay. So I would say their map pool is okay. It's fine. Like, I don't think there's really anything to poke at that. But the biggest thing for me is tactically sometimes they can fall behind. I don't think they're as good at adjusting mid-round or mid-map. are calling the audibles that are needed to get them out of tight situations. They can kind of just sometimes get bogged down a little bit. And so that is kind of the one, big thing against them, of course. And they're up against Heroic, who's on a pretty crazy upward trend. I mean, before going to Shanghai, we saw them place top 4 at Rio, beating Vitality and beating G2 in a best of 1. In fact, if we want to just go ahead and talk about head-to-head right now, that is the only head-to-head to my knowledge, is that they played each other in a best of 1 at IM Rio on Dust 2 and Heroic 1. I don't think they've played each other in any other setting. So that kind of takes the head-to-head history aspect away from the prediction. But yeah, after that, they obviously had the second place at Espu, where they lost to Ints in a best of 5. So that was kind of damning, but Ints just seemed like on some weird run that tournament, so I almost kind of looked past it. They came second at TWC, losing to MongolZ in the grand finals, but taking care of all the tier 2 teams. Then at the RMR, did a pretty good job there. They beat that Passion UA team, who was giving a lot of other teams trouble, and advanced 3-1. And then at the major, they have done pretty well. They've gotten some best of 1 wins over Big and FaZe. They had to play MongolZ and Spirit in best of 3, so that's like the toughest road you could have gotten. And they took maps off of them and made it very close. And they ultimately beat Navi in a best of 3 to make it through. So pretty huge upset win to make it to the playoffs. And again, they just went on an upward trend in general when you look at their results. And remember, this team had a super turbulent year where they couldn't use their full 5 for a while. Then even when they did get Dexter embedded, you have to understand the guy had like a year layoff of playing Counter-Strike. So a lot of different variables involved, but they finally seem to find their footing. First off, Shush is a superstar rifler. He's one of the strongest players in the tournament. Very good at creating openings or trading or just being a very mobile and dynamic, aggressive force on the map. You have Dexter, who is finding his rhythm in Shanghai as an opper, playing very, very well. Kixon's calling a good game and fragging pretty well for an IGL standards. Tessus, his overall numbers aren't great, but he's doing his job when he's called upon to help do the entry work. And then Shush is just quietly doing his job and looking stable and fine and giving you what you want. Their map pool looks pretty good, in my opinion. Like, their Ancient has always been kind of strong. They did have a little bit of trouble throughout the RMR in the major, losing to like Passion UA, MongolZ, and Spirit. But, that's MongolZ and Spirit was an overtime game. They've also beaten FaZe and Navi on the map at the major. So I think their Ancient's really damn good. Their Anubis is solid. Their Mirage is very good. I would say they're improving their nuke, though it's still not great. They don't play Inferno. And then, obviously, Vertigo is not really something that's going to get played here. So if we're looking at how things are going to go, obviously, Vertigo is not going to get played. Inferno won't get played. There's a chance that we could see these teams clash on an Ancient or an Anubis, which will be kind of common ground for both teams, in my opinion, as far as how well they play them. I do think that G2 has advantage on Dust 2. I do think Mirage, I'd actually probably give the advantage to Heroic. Maybe not, though, honestly. They're pretty even on Mirage now that I think about it. And then Nuke, probably give the edge to G2 as well. I think G2 has the advantage on Nuke. I think Mirage is pretty even. I think Ancient's pretty even. I think the big thing, though, is that G2 has a big advantage on Dust 2. Is going to be something that could certainly play into their favor in this veto. And then they also, by the fact that Heroic bans Inferno, that's one of the maps that it's been shaky for them, so they don't even have to worry about it in that best of 3, which is nice. So even though Heroic's done a lot of great things, and I am pleased by their upward trajectory and what they've done so far in Shanghai, and certainly there's nothing to be scoffed at that they were able to upset Navi to make it to the playoffs. I do think G2 overall is just going to be a little bit stronger and be able to beat them. So now we got Liquid versus Spirit, huh? And Liquid's a crazy one because they seemingly are always able to beat people ranked below them or right at their level, but then they just can't beat top 5 teams and they can't beat FaZe. That is basically what their year has been. I mean, yes, they started strong, beating Navi twice at that Blast Fall groups when the roster first came together. But then we immediately saw them kind of struggle, at Cologne going top 8, having to go through the play-in, but just losing the FaZe twice. And their only win was against Fury and Complexity, which are, decent wins, but nothing that really leaps off the page. Then at EPL, again, they were knocked out by G2. They also had a loss to Vitality. Their wins were against Ints, VP, and Cole. So not crazy quality wins, but okay. Blast Fall Final, they actually did beat Spirit in a best of 3. That was nice, but then they immediately got beat by Vitality, granted, very close series against Vitality, so I'm going to give them credit there, but then again, knocked out by FaZe. I Am Rio, what do you know? They got knocked out again by FaZe. Also lost to Navi. Pretty close series, though. Blast World Finals, they got knocked out by G2 and Vitality, so it wasn't just they finally had someone else beat them. But again, close series, 1-2 each series. Particularly the Vitality game, they had a very close loss on Nuke. Then, so far in Shanghai, they took care of business at the Americas RMRs. I mean, they beat Furia to advance in the best of 3, so did what they needed to do within their regional play. In the opening stage, they had a pretty easy run, if we're honest. Yes, Cloud9 had some firepower. Yes, Wildcard did some pretty cool things. Even FlyQuest did some pretty cool things, but that's still kind of an easy 3-0 run in my opinion. Elimination stage, they played Navi and lost in the best of 1, but then they beat Game Legion, they beat Furia, then they beat Made in Brazil. Again, not bad, but just nothing crazy impressive. It's just, but they can only play who's in front of them, so, it's tough to really get too upset. As far as the team, I mean, Twist is coming into his own as an IGL. I think he's actually calling really good Counter-Strike for them on Ancient and Anubis in particular, but they clearly have some vulnerabilities on Dust2 and Mirage, so that is kind of my big issue. I also think that even their nuke at times is lacking, though a lot of the losses are very close. When we look at their players, Twist is fragging pretty well for an IGL. You put him next to Blitz and Big Uzair as far as like fragging IGLs go. Naf has kicked it back into gear again after having a little bit of a lull in play. He's back to his normal self. Yakindar's doing a little bit better in his entry role in Shanghai compared to some of the off tournaments he's had this year. Still not where you want him to be, but it is a little better than where he's been at earlier in the year. JKS is doing his job incredibly. And Ultimate, who started red hot, kind of sunk to a lower level, but now has been able to get back into good form since being in Shanghai. And I think he is a really cool story because he's a very aggressive hopper, which can sometimes backfire, like it did at those few tournaments where he kind of got found out and started struggling. But he's also a solid rifler who can help entry with an AK on T sides to take a little bit of the weight off of Yakindar and, off of Twist to, create space and things of that nature. So I do like that about the lineup. I also like that they are trying to add new things at times on some of these maps. Like, for example, on Anubis, they added a few new executes, I noticed, at the Blast World Finals. And so it seems like they're still trying to find new solutions and new things. Tactically, they're not bad. Again, I think their Ancient Anubis look up to snuff and look up to the meta that we expect on those two maps. On Dust 2, they know how to play it, but they're just not finding any consistent success there. So I think that is a tough one for them. They've lost their last 6 games, and a lot of them they're getting 5 rounds or less overall. So their Dust 2 is just a mega vulnerability out there. Their Inferno, they've actually turned around lately. They're 4-1 in their last 5 games, so I'm actually kind of liking that. Their Mirage is questionable, and then their Nuke, they're 1-4 in their last 5 games, but again, lots of close losses. So for me, it's like map pool-wise, they're going to ban Vertigo, and then their Dust 2 is a massive vulnerability, and even their Nuke is not something I think that they can rely upon. They basically just have to count on Ancient and Anubis and Inferno. That's like their 3 chances to get something done, I feel like. Meanwhile, we flip over to Spirit. Obviously, we all know Donk, Superstar Rifler, Phenom in an entry fragging role, doing big numbers in a role where it seems it should be impossible to be that good, that consistently, but he does it. Shiro, we all know, can be his trusty sidekick with the AWP, and even after a couple of blips, he has been mostly fine out there doing his job. Zontic has actually had a really good trip in Shanghai so far, in my opinion. He's seen an uptick in form compared to some of the other events we saw leading up to Shanghai, and he is the X factor for me. If he can perform well next to Shiro and Donk, this team becomes much more dangerous than any other time you see them play. And then, obviously, what you're going to get with Chopper and Magix. So far at the Major, they have done pretty well. I mean, they beat Navi and Heroic to make the playoffs. That's pretty nice, and that's a great bounce back because they actually look kind of weak in the RMR, losing to Passion UA, and then, having to go through Sashi and Nip, and even some of those maps look a bit labored, even if they were 2-0 series. They obviously lost to G2 in a very close best-of-3 at the EU RMR. So, all in all, good. Obviously, they're off the back of a finals appearance at the Blast World Final, where they were able to beat Vitality and FaZe, but then lost to G2 in the Grand Final 0-3. We also saw them win one of the Bet Boom events over Eternal Fire and Mouse Sports, which was pretty solid earlier this year, but then they had a last place finish at Cologne. Granted, they lost to MongolZ and G2, though. Really good teams. Also saw them win the Blast Spring Finals over Navi, Vitality, VP, and G2. So they definitely had some moments this year where they've looked strong, and they've had moments in Shanghai where they've looked strong. I think going into their map pool, they're fantastic on Ancient. They're fantastic on Dust 2, which is going to be a huge problem for Liquid. They are solid on Mirage, which is another big problem for Liquid. They are much better track record on Nuke than Liquid has. And they forced Liquid to have to stick to their permaban of Vertigo because they're really good on Vertigo. So it's not like Liquid can try to do some masterful float Vertigo and try to do something crazy there. So I think, unfortunately for Liquid, their map pool just overlaps with Spirit too much. Like, Ancient, like, the one advantage I would give Liquid is Anubis. I do think that they could beat Spirit on Anubis. I do. But I don't know that I could say the same thing about Ancient. Yes, Liquid's Ancient is strong, but the resume is not as impressive as Spirit's is. Dust 2, Spirit has a clear advantage. Mirage, Spirit has a clear advantage. Nuke, Spirit has a clear advantage. So at the end of the day, Spirit wins. Now, for our final quarterfinals matchup, this is a really cool one. And we'll start with MongolZ just because it's been such a cool story to follow. You have MongolZ being the first team from East Asia to ever make the playoffs of a Valve major. It's our 21st Valve major, so 20 majors of no representation from that region in the playoffs. 11 years of waiting for a team from that area to finally break through, and they did. They finally done it, and they've done it by being able to match the meta of Counter-Strike and not relying on gimmicks and mechanics. They have a very complete team. Blitz is a great IGL who calls good Counter-Strike. They can play slow, they can play fast, they can play defaults, they can do pacing changes. They play the complete gambit of CS. And Blitz frags as an entry and as alert. Then you have 910, who is the best opper East Asia has produced in CSGO or CS2. Like, Kaze in his prime was pretty good, but 910 is head and shoulders above any other opera I've seen out of that region. Sinzu is a fantastic, aggressive rifling star. No, he's not Donk, but he does have a pretty damn good success rate in opening duels and takes a lot of them. And then you have Mazzino. And Mazzino, to me, is super cool because he's evolved so much. When he first was playing with MongolZ, he looked a bit hit or miss, didn't really see a lot in him, but he's just grown so much throughout the year. He's way more dependable. He's become much more of a strong anchor, an extremity player. And now he's even taking more opening duels the last 3 months. He's at 18% opening attempts with a 55% success rate in the last 3 months on LAN. That's crazy because earlier this year, he was barely ever taking opening duels and his success rate was quite low. So the fact that he's become a playmaker on the extremities has almost put MongolZ in the same camp of Navi, where you have such an equal distribution of who can take the opening pick and who can create plays across the map in the early stage. But he's also a great mid to late round player and a great CT player. He's become a strong anchor. And then Techno, look, his numbers aren't going to leap off the page, but he plays that entry role nicely. He kind of pairs up with Sinzu and can be that 1-2 punch and can at times, even if his overall numbers aren't good, be pretty successful in opening duels. He's actually been growing in that category in the last 3 months, which has kind of taken the load off of Blitz a little bit in the IGL position. Obviously, prior to the major and RMRs, they had won that TWC event over 3D Max and Heroic, which is pretty good. They won their RMR. And then at the major, 3-0'd the opening stage. And then in the elimination stage, they beat G2, they beat Mouz, and they beat Heroic. I don't know what more you want out of an elimination stage run. That is an impressive route to the playoffs, right? Then map pool wise, this team has a sick map pool. Their Ancient's hella good. 11-5 in the last 16 games. Anubis, pretty damn solid. They've won 6 in a row now, and they had a good early year on Anubis as well. So Ancient Anubis, fire. Inferno, they've won their last 4 games in a row. 11-5 overall record. Looks damn good. Mirage, 8-3 in the last 11 games. Looks really damn good. Their weakness would be Dust 2. They don't play it very much. 4-3 record. They've had some big losses to Virtus Pro and Saul, and they lost to Falcons. But they have been able to beat Eternal Fire and Heroic on Dust 2. So it's not like they're complete slouches, but they just don't have the same track record in Dust 2 as they have other maps. Their Nuke, 4-6 in their last 10 games, but they have gone 3-1 in their last 4. And most of their losses are to like really strong teams like Spirit, for example, Vitality multiple times, things of that nature. So all in all, though, a really good map pool. They don't play Vertigo. Their DusT's a little shaky. Their Nuke's a little shaky, but really good on Ancient, really good on Anubis, really good Inferno, really good Mirage. So definitely can go a lot of places, in my opinion. But Mouse Sports, it's hard not to like Mouse Sports. Clearly a top 5 team in the world. They haven't won a lot. They won the EPL season 19, obviously, in a studio environment, and they beat Vitality 3-0 in a best of 5 to do it. So they've had that. Then they won the next event over Spirit in a best of 5, 3-0. And they've been consistently placing in or around the top 4 at every event that they play. Look at Cologne, top 4, second at Rio, where they beat Vitality, actually. And I know that they had this whole thing where it was like people were saying, oh, they can't play on the big stage. Well, they came second at Rio, beating Vitality and Furia, who were looking really good on home soil at that event. And they had beat FaZe earlier in the tournament. And yeah, they lost to Na'Vi in the grand finals, but they took a map off of, and they looked improved. And even they came top 4 at Cologne, another big event where they actually beat G2. And then, yes, they lost to Na'Vi 0-2, but they lost to Inferno in overtime, and they lost Mirage 11-13. So they played really good Counter-Strike against the best team in the world at the time at the Cathedral of Counter-Strike. So I feel like they've kind of shed some of the not being able to play on the big stage critique that they've gotten at other points this year. So far at Shanghai, they 3-0'd the RMR, including beating Na'Vi in a best of 3. So super sick run to the major. At the major, a couple of losses to MongolZ and FaZe in best of 1s, but they were very close games. Then they beat 3D Max and made Brazil to make the playoffs. Torzi is super underrated as an opper. He's been their best player so far in Shanghai. Super reliable, has dug them out of some tight spots. I really like Torzi. I think he's a fantastic opper. Yeah, he's no Munacy. Yeah, he's no Ziwu. You're probably going to rate Cheer over him as well, but he's up there in my opinion. He's really good. Shuhei, one of the best IGLs in the world. Tactically, this is one of the most diverse teams in the game. I think Mouse Sports, alongside Na'Vi, are the best teams tactically in Counter-Strike. Just so good at having so many different openers, being able to play default, being able to mid-round, being able to throw in set pieces, pacing changes. They can do it on every single map. They're just so broad in how they can play the game. And Shuei's fragging out of his mind in Shanghai right now, actually, as an entry fragger. It's actually absurd how good his numbers are in his success rate in opening duels. I don't know if it'll hold, but so far he's been damn good. Brolin's been fantastic in his role as like a flex rifler who can entry but also can, play the extremities. He's been playing very well, in my opinion, overall. Jimmy, we all know Jim Fat's going to get his job done as that extremity player and anchor. Fantastic stuff. Zershin's the one for me who has dipped a little bit as far as like his success in opening duels is a lot lower than most other entry fraggers in the playoffs, but he's still putting up good numbers, and he's still playing well, and he's still having pop-off games. He just hasn't been as... He's the one guy who suffers the most in the big stage games, it feels like. It feels like he has the biggest decrease in performance compared to the other players on the team, but he's still really good for his role. He's still really good. This team's just really good. Their map pool, also incredibly strong. Ancient, they've lost it the last 3 times they've played it, but overall have a good record for the year. They don't play Anubis, that's their ban. Dust 2, fine. Inferno looks really good. Their nuke is fantastic. They play Vertigo, and most teams are going to ban it. And because they do play it, that forces them to go ahead and use that Vertigo ban, even if they have been a little bit shaky on it results-wise lately. Like they started off the year red hot, but then been hit or miss since. But again, most teams just don't even play it, so it doesn't matter. Their Mirage has been a little shaky, I will say. They're 5-5 in their last 10 games. But their losses are to like MongolZ, Vitality, Na'Vi, some of the best Mirage teams in the world. Meanwhile, they've been able to beat Na'Vi and Spirit and G2 and some other really strong teams on Mirage recently. And overall for the year, Mirage has been very big for them. So, really good map pool. As far as up against MongolZ will obviously have to ban Vertigo. Mouse Sports will obviously have to ban Anubis. The only real head-to-head that these two teams have against each other is going to be that best of 1 that MongolZ won on Mirage. I do think Mirage should come back up in this matchup, obviously. And if it does go to Mirage, I might favor MongolZ, but it's not a sure thing. I do think when it comes to Ancient, MongolZ have the advantage as well. But I think Mousesports can attack a vulnerability in Dust 2, and that could be a problem for MongolZ. I also think that Inferno could be a close game between the... I think Mirage and Inferno are kind of 50-50 for me, whereas I give Mouse a clear advantage on Nuke and Dust 2. And then I think Ancient, I might give the edge to MongolZ if it gets played. I think this is the hardest game to predict out of the whole damn thing. I could really see this going either way just because of where their overlaps are in the map pool and how well MongolZ have been performing. All their individuals seem in fine form. Mouse, some of their players at times have looked a little off. But overall, you also have to take into account the pressure of playing a major playoff. It's something that none of these MongolZ players have ever faced before. That pressure, that feeling. Yes, they've gotten to play in front of the crowd during the opening stage of the major and all that jazz, but this is something a little bit different. It's a new venue. It's a bigger venue, bigger crowd. They've thrived so far in the environment, but I don't know. And then they're up against a team that's known for sometimes struggling in big environments too. So I don't even know if the pressure angle, if you even give the edge one way or another that way. This is the most 50-50 toss, I think, in the quarterfinals. I've been back and forth on this so much. I do think Mouse is just a little bit more favored, though. Just barely, man. It's so close. And then I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I do think that in this matchup in particular, this will also be a tight race, I think. But I think I like Spirit here. I just think Vitality's the best team in the world, and they're going to win the major because of it. And there you go. There's my picks. I know it was long, but I haven't done this content thing in a while, and I wanted to talk Counter-Strike with you all, nerd out a little bit. At least I made these fast. And there you go. That's my picks.